You are trying to describe an elephant to people who have never, ever seen an elephant before. Jim Chandler said to us in his wonderfully booming voice, and he was exactly right. Good afternoon, folks. I'm Vic Howie, and today I want to share with you a passion that has had a great impact on my life, and unexpectedly had a great impact on many other lives as well. And I want to share the big idea that came from that passion, what this elephant called the U.S. National Whitewater Center is all about. Recently, about 4 months ago, back in October, my wife and I and our clients were having a client event at the U.S. National Whitewater Center called Zipline and Dine. And my wife, Sherry, and I were in charge of the third and final group to go off on the zip line that evening, and we were standing 40 feet up on a platform in the tree when one of my clients turned to me and said, "Hey, Vic, tell us a little bit about how this center got started." I was telling the story, and it just gotten into it when all of a sudden one of our young guides said, "You're the napkin guy." I said, "Well, what do you mean by that?" She said, "All of the guides here have heard the story how the center started with a doodle on a napkin." And then she shouted out, "I can't believe you're in my group." So today I want to share with you that idea that became the U.S. National Whitewater Center, and an idea that actually went from this to this. But first, I need to get some business out of the way. I have a confession to make, and this is very important to the whole story, and you just need to know this. I am a whitewater kayaker, and it permeates everything I do. Are there any whitewater kayakers in the group here? Raise your hand. Right on. You guys are going to understand this story really well. I look forward to catching up with you later. The rest of you, we got to figure out here. Now, who of you have been whitewater rafting before? Get your hands up. Oh, that's great. Gosh, that's a lot. How many of you been in a canoe? That's even better. Do I have any mountain bikers in the group? Yeah, there you go. Right on. Any rock climbers, mountain climbers? Whew, man, I admire what y'all do. That's crazy stuff. And lastly, who here has ever had one glass of wine too many? Get your hands up. That should be most of everybody, right? Thank you. All this is relevant to this story. My whitewater paddling passion started in September of 1997 when my wife Sherry and I were invited up to the Nantahala Outdoor Center in western North Carolina to learn to kayak. And our instructors those days were very good friends of ours, and as we got out onto the rapids, we felt very much at ease with them guiding us. And that's because all of our instructors were also members of the U.S. Olympic whitewater team. So we were really good hands. And I like to tell people that's like getting your first golf lesson from Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Tiger Woods, and Phil Mickelson. Well, as my opportunities to start paddling more came about, my joy and my passion just flat out ignited. I mean, I couldn't get enough of this stuff. It was like a new drug for me. It was kind of like a runner's high on constant flow. You know what I mean? Have you had that happen to you before? You know what I'm talking about, right? Well, I was all in. I bought all the equipment. I found people who went to the river frequently so I could go. Any chance to go be a river rat, I was on it. And when I wasn't paddling, I was thinking paddling or I was talking paddling. And people around me just didn't understand what was going on with me and what this passion was all about. You're describing an elephant to people who have never, ever seen an elephant before. Well, that's right. So what am I going to do about that? Well, in my usual all-in, I started inviting all my friends to go. I got them lodging, I got them equipment, I got them lessons. I started taking clients up to the Nantahala Outdoor Center and doing canoe, whitewater adventure trips with my Olympic friends. We started a kids' whitewater paddling club for at-risk youth with the Olympic athletes in 7 different cities, including Chicago, Richmond, and Charlotte. Folks, I was all in, I was on fire, and I was spreading the gospel. I wanted everybody to feel this passion like I did. But I kept running across one recurring issue, and that was it was actually costly both in dollars and in time commitment to get good people out to good whitewater rivers. And the fact is, in the eastern United States, very few good whitewater rivers are located in an urban area. But on an early April evening in 2000, I got the answer and solved the problem. And that night caught lightning in a bottle. Now, the date of April 9th, 2000, we're at the Ocoee River in eastern Tennessee. The U.S. Olympic whitewater team trials were being contested there. And whoever walked away winning those team trials would represent the United States at the Sydney Summer Olympic Games a few months later. All the important people in the sport were there, the athletes, the coaches, the judges, sponsors, families. And later that evening, after the races were over with, a lot of them retired to the living room of Joe and Lisa Jacoby's bed and breakfast. The discussion that evening went through the day's events and then quickly moved to this Sydney whitewater course that was going to be the place where the Olympics were going to be held. And everybody was talking about how fantastic it was. And what made it so fantastic is it was a fully circular, artificial, man-made whitewater river. And what they had done in Sydney is taken the course and changed it. If you've been watching the Olympics over the past 2 weeks, you know that alpine skiing starts at a ski house up top and it finishes at the bottom, and you have this course in between. The whitewater competitions are the same way. They start up the river, they finish down the river, and you've got a course. If you're at the bottom, you don't get to see what happens at the top. And if you're at the top, you don't get to see what happens at the bottom. But they took this river, man-made, turned it into circular, dropped it into a stadium, and just like track and field, you've got a circular course. So the 4x100, you see it start, you see it end. Now with whitewater, you could see the whole event start to finish. It was game-changing. What I heard was, now we can create an artificial whitewater river and put it anywhere you want to. And what that meant to me was two things. One, I could get all my disadvantaged youth and their families and friends out on the water more frequently. And number two, very selfishly, I was going to be able to paddle more. Well, I had that first big glass of red wine. And I asked the question to the group. I said, why don't we have one of these in the United States? Why are all our athletes having to go to Athens and Sydney and places like that to train on these artificial rivers? Well, I got some laughter and a couple of comments around lack of funding, things like that. So I had another big glass of red wine. And I asked the question, why isn't this going to be located in the southeast where all the athletes are training anyway? And that got a bunch of laughs too. And I wasn't trying to be funny, but I did have one more glass of red wine. And I blurted out, let's do it in Charlotte! And that was funny because at that point in time, Charlotte was clearly not the epicenter of whitewater sports. But one person was not laughing, and that's my good friend Chet Rabin, who was sitting right across from me. And he was nodding at me like, right on, right on. And later that evening, I took out a pen and a cocktail napkin, and I drew this. That's what a whitewater river looks like after a really big bottle of red wine. But I think you get the picture, right? That's the skyline of Charlotte in the back and a circular river I just heard about. Well, as fate would have it, the next day, Chet's car actually broke down while we were there. And so he had the napkin, and he had a couple of days of downtime to do the research on the Sydney course. And he found out what it was made of, what materials they used, and how much it cost. And he came back to Charlotte and called me a couple of days later. He said, Vic, we can do this. Well, it was 4 days and a bottle of red wine later. I said, do what? He said, we can make a whitewater park. Well, how do you start to make an artificial man-made whitewater river? How would you do it? Fortunately, there's a company that did that, and we got in touch with them and talked with them and learned what it would take. And all of a sudden, Chet and I had a startup business on our hands with a business plan that centered around creating a large man-made artificial whitewater river. Don't you know the bankers are going to love this one? Well, we knew we had a fundamental problem because of that, and so first thing we did as a startup, we went and created a really, really influential board of directors and board of advisors. And what we did was we looked for people who had a very high recognition name in our community and had great influence, because this idea was really crazy. And then in early 2001, we incorporated our Charlotte Whitewater Park, Inc., easily the most outrageous not-for-profit in the state of North Carolina. Now, as the leader of a startup, it was my responsibility to keep the vision and the mission in front of everybody all the time. And our vision was created to provide an outdoor lifestyle to city dwellers, and to be able to let those city dwellers associate with adventure sports and the outdoors, where families could go outdoors and play together, where kids could run, jump on rocks, climb on things, play in the water, and not get in trouble. This elephant was getting easier to describe. It was August 30th, 2000. We were in a conference room and we had 80 of the community's biggest leaders from city government, county government, YMCAs, kids programs, schools, colleges, business, all in one room. And that day, we got agreement on what this Charlotte Whitewater Park ought to mean to our Charlotte community. And that night, the 5 members of the executive committee and a few other friends went over to a pub nearby, and we celebrated. And that night, each of us took out a $1 bill and wrote on it our name and the date we thought the Whitewater Park would open, and we sealed it in an envelope. Folks, we were getting ready to change the world. "12 days later, as we settled into our morning work routine, the first plane flew into the World Trade Center tower. The world changed before we had a chance to. Now, as with everything during that time, this project just shut down. But as a few months went by, that American resiliency came back in everyday life, and we started getting some normalcy back. And we did the same with the project. My job as chairman was to blow on the embers and reignite the flame. And so, in the spirit of the category, I'd rather be lucky than good, 5 things happened that just absolutely vaulted the velocity of this center in getting done. Number 1, this guy in November started calling me, and he called me a lot, and he wanted to talk about the project. He was a big fan. He was an outdoors guy, a kayaker, loved it. And so every time he called, we talked for a really long time, and I was trying to figure out how to get him involved in the project. And as we talked one day, he called me in mid-December and said, "Vic, I'm sending you a proposal." I said, "A proposal for what?" He said, "I am proposing to be the executive director of the Charlotte Whitewater Park." And I said, "Well, you know we don't have any money." He said, "I'll get the money." And in late December of 2001, our board hired our first executive director, Jeff Wise. And today, 12 years later, Jeff is still our executive director. Number 2, when Jeff came on board, he started stirring things up and getting action going again. So in early 2002, we were approached by a group that said, "Hey, y'all need to get away from that 15-acre tract uptown and look at some other broader places. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Parks and Rec has a lot of land available, and you might want to take a look at that in their inventory." So Jeff went out and started looking around at different pieces of property. One day he called me. He said, "You got to see this." I said, "When?" He said, "Now." So he came and picked me up, and we rode out to this area that was 200 acres on the Catawba River in the western part of the county, and we got out of the car, we walked it for 20 minutes, and we looked at each other and said, "This is it." And it was, and it still is. That's where the center is located today. Number 3, by going to that site and using that as our projected site, it opened up a whole new scope of the project. There were already mountain bike trails there. We were able to add in flatwater canoeing, kayaking, climbing, zip lining, trail running, all kinds of things to the Whitewater River we had talked about. Fourth thing is, it also opened the scope up to make us realize we were no longer just an uptown park. We could be a regional center. So we reached across the river and invited Gaston County and 3 of its cities, Belmont, Mount Holly, and Gastonia, to join us, and they did. They embraced it wholly and became partners in this project. So now we're a regional center, and at that point we dropped the name Charlotte Whitewater Park and increased our scope and our broader perspective and renamed ourselves the U.S. National Whitewater Center. And then lastly, number 5 was we worked very closely with the city of Charlotte to relocate the headquarters of the USA Canoe and Kayak national governing body from Lake Placid, New York to Charlotte. That was a huge coup. It was the national governing body for the Olympic sport, and we now had them in Charlotte. And with that, we turned our attention to the USOC, U.S. Olympic Committee, and petitioned them to become the official training center of the U.S. National Whitewater Team. And we got that as well, and that was one huge celebration when we got that, because now we had the Olympic rings behind us. And you want to talk about a marketing giant? Well, fast forward to May of 2006. We like to celebrate a lot. We had a celebration around the water being turned on and the pumps fully engaged to fill the river up for the first time. And I got to tell you, it was powerful and very emotional for all of us that worked so hard on that to see the water actually finally running through our river. Then fast forward to August of 2006, and we opened fully to the public. That looks great, doesn't it? Since then, we have hosted 2 Olympic team trials, one in 2008 for the for the Beijing Games, and then most recently 2012 for the London Games. Guys, there's so much more I want to tell you, but I think you kind of know how this story is wrapping up. The napkin turned into a startup. The startup turned into a really fun business. The really fun business turned into the largest whitewater man-made river in the world. And today, over 750,000 people annually come play in our backyard. It was a great experience, and hundreds of people were involved in creating this center. But I'm very blessed to have been with some of my really good friends through that process. Chet Rabin, Joe Jacoby, Bob Campbell, Jim Chandler, Jeff Wise, Bradford Berry, Scott Shipley. A friend of mine said it very, very well. There is no substitute for working with smart, motivated, and amusing people. Now you know what this elephant looks like. Was it easy? No way. But was it fun? What do you think? Y'all been great. Thank you. Come see me at the river.